the new god of music, the new gods of music, the new god of music, the new goddess of music, the new goddesses of music, the new goddess of music, the old god of music, the old gods of music, the old god of music, the old goddess of music, the old goddesses of music, the old goddess of music, the greater god of music, the greater gods of music, the greater god of music, the greater goddess of music, the greater goddesses of music, the greater goddess of music, the lesser god of music, the lesser gods of music, the lesser god of music, the lesser goddess of music, the lesser goddesses of music, the lesser goddess of music, the higher god of music, the higher gods of music, the higher god of music, the higher goddess of music, the higher goddesses of music, the higher goddess of music, the lower god of music, the lower gods of music, the lower god of music, the lower goddess of music, the lower goddesses of music, the lower goddess of music, the greater spirit of music, the greater spirits of music, the greater spirit of music, the lesser spirit of music, the lesser spirits of music, the lesser spirit of music, the higher spirit of music, the higher spirits of music, the higher spirit of music, the lower spirit of music, the lower spirits of music, the lower spirit of music, the major god of music, the major gods of music, the major god of music, the major goddess of music, the major goddesses of music, the major goddess of music, the minor god of music, the minor gods of music, the minor god of music, the minor goddess of music, the minor goddesses of music, the minor goddess of music, the superior god of music, the superior gods of music, the superior god of music, the superior goddess of music, the superior goddesses of music, the superior goddess of music, the inferior god of music, the inferior gods of music, the inferior god of music, the inferior goddess of music, the inferior goddesses of music, the inferior goddess of music, the ancestor god of music, the ancestor gods of music, the ancestor god of music, the ancestor goddess of music, the ancestor goddesses of music, the ancestor goddess of music, the ascendant god of music, the ascendant gods of music, the ascendant god of music, the ascendant goddess of music, the ascendant goddesses of music, the ascendant goddess of music, the descendant god of music, the descendant gods of music, the descendant god of music, the descendant goddess of music, the descendant goddesses of music, the descendant goddess of music, the transcendent god of music, the transcendent gods of music, the transcendent god of music, the transcendent goddess of music, the transcendent goddesses of music, the transcendent goddess of music, the past god of music, the past gods of music, the past god of music, the past goddess of music, the past goddesses of music, the past goddess of music, the present god of music, the present gods of music, the present god of music, the present goddess of music, the present goddesses of music, the present goddess of music, the future god of music, the future gods of music, the future god of music, the future goddess of music, the future goddesses of music, the future goddess of music, the authentic god of music, the authentic gods of music, the authentic god of music, the authentic goddess of music, the authentic goddesses of music, the authentic goddess of music, the synthetic god of music, the synthetic gods of music, the synthetic god of music, the synthetic goddess of music, the synthetic goddesses of music, the synthetic goddess of music, the progressive god of music, the progressive gods of music, the progressive god of music, the progressive goddess of music, the progressive goddesses of music, the progressive goddess of music, the regressive god of music, the regressive gods of music, the regressive god of music, the regressive goddess of music, the regressive goddesses of music, the regressive goddess of music, the ordinary god of music, the ordinary gods of music, the ordinary god of music, the ordinary goddess of music, the ordinary goddesses of music, the ordinary goddess of music, The extraordinary God of music. The extraordinary gods of music. The extraordinary God of music. The extraordinary goddess of music. The extraordinary goddesses of music. The extraordinary goddess of music. The static god of music. The static gods of music. The static god of music. The static goddess of music. The static goddesses of music. The static goddess of music. The dynamic god of music. The dynamic gods of music. The dynamic god of music. The dynamic goddess of music. The dynamic goddesses of music. The dynamic goddess of music. The land god of music. The land gods of music. The land god of music. The land goddess of music. The land goddesses of music. The land goddess of music. The sea god of music. The sea gods of music. The sea god of music. The sea goddess of music. The sea goddesses of music. The sea goddess of music. The sky god of music. The sky gods of music. The sky god of music. The sky goddess of music. The sky goddesses of music. The sky goddess of music. The god of music. The gods of music. The god of music. The goddess of music. The goddesses of music. The goddess of music. The half god of music. The half gods of music. The half god of music. The half goddess of music. The half goddesses of music. The half goddess of music. The vessel of music. The vessels of music. The vessel of music. The name of music. The names of music. The name of music. The person of music. The persons of music. The person of music. The persona of music. The personas of music. The persona of music. The personage of music. The personages of music. The personage of music. The personality of music. The personalities of music. The personality of music. The personification of music. The personifications of music. The personification of music. The image of music. The images of music. The image of music. The imagination of music. The imaginations of music. The imagination of music. The belief of music. The beliefs of music. The belief of music. The thought of music. The thoughts of music. The thought of music. The word of music. The words of music. The word of music. The action of music. The actions of music. The action of music. The reaction of music. The reactions of music. The reaction of music. The feeling of music. The feelings of music. The feeling of music. The situation of music. The situations of music. The situation of music. The circumstance of music. The circumstances of music. The circumstance of music. The environment of music. The environments of music. The environment of music. The relationship of music. The relationships of music. The relationship of music. The number of music. The numbers of music. The number of music. The formula of music. The formulas of music. The formula of music. The equation of music. The equations of music. The equation of music. The theory of music. The theories of music. The theory of music. The symbol of music. The symbols of music. The symbol of music. The color of music. The colors of music. The color of music. The thing of music. The things of music. The thing of music. The way of music. The ways of music. The way of music. The place of music. The places of music. The place of music. The time of music. The times of music. The time of music. The event of music. The events of music. The event of music. The result of music. The results of music. The result of music. The crown of music. The crowns of music. The crown of music. The throne of music. The thrones of music. The throne of music. The music king. The music kings. The music kingdom. The music kingdoms. The music king's subject. The music king's subjects. The music king's dominion. The music king's dominions. The kingdom of music. The kingdoms of music. The kingdom of music. The music queen. The music queens. The music queendom. The music queendoms. The music queen's subject. The music queen's subjects. The music queen's dominion. The music queen's dominions, the queendom of music. The queendoms of music. The queendom of music, the music prince. The music princes. The music princedom. The music princedoms. The music prince's subject. The music prince's subjects. The music prince's dominion. The music prince's dominions, the princedom of music. The princedoms of music. The princedom of music, the music princess. The music princesses. The music princessdom. The music princessdoms. The music princess's subject. The music princess's subjects. The music princess's dominion. The music princess's dominions, the princessdom of music. The princessdoms of music. The princessdom of music, the lord of music. The lords of music. The lord of music, the lordess of music. The lordesses of music. The lordess of music, the priest of music. The priests of music. The priest of music, the priestess of music. The priestesses of music. The priestess of music, the ritual of music. The rituals of music. The ritual of music, the shrine of music. The shrines of music. The shrine of music, the temple of music. The temples of music. The temple of music, the leader of music. The leaders of music. The leader of music, the follower of music. The followers of music. The follower of music, the natural substance of music. The natural substances of music. The natural substance of music, the supernatural substance of music. The supernatural substances of music. The supernatural substance of music, the temporal substance of music. The temporal substances of music. The temporal substance of music, the spiritual substance of music. The spiritual substances of music. The spiritual substance of music, the natural form of music. The natural forms of music. The natural form of music, the supernatural form of music. The supernatural forms of music. The supernatural form of music, the temporal form of music. The temporal forms of music. The temporal form of music, the spiritual form of music. The spiritual forms of music. The spiritual form of music, the age of music. The ages of music. The age of music, the era of music. The eras of music. The era of music, the awakener of music. The awakeners of music. The awakener of music, the awakening of music. The awakenings of music. The awakening of music, the realm of music. The realms of music. The realm of music, the dimension of music. The dimensions of music. The dimension of music, the zone of music. The zones of music. The zone of music, the frequency of music. The frequencies of music. The frequency of music, the century of music. The centuries of music. The century of music, the millennium of music. The millenniums of music. The millennium of music, the purpose of music. The purposes of music. The purpose of music, the meaning of music. The meanings of music. The meaning of music, the culture of music. The cultures of music. The culture of music, the demonstrator of music. The demonstrators of music. The demonstrator of music, the demonstration of music. The demonstrations of music. The demonstration of music, the manifester of music. The manifestors of music. The manifester of music, the manifestation of music. The manifestations of music. The manifestation of music, the presence of music. The presences of music. The presence of music, the glow of music. The glows of music. The glow of music, the goal of music. The goals of music. The goal of music, the plan of music. The plans of music. The plan of music, the book of music. The books of music. The book of music, the philosopher of music. The philosophers of music. The philosopher of music, the philosophy of music. The philosophies of music. The philosophy of music, the releaser of music. The releasers of music. The releaser of music, the release of music. The releases of music. The release of music, the variable of music. The variables of music. The variable of music, the cause of music. The causes of music. The cause of music, the effect of music. The effects of music. The effect of music. The journey of music. The journeys of music. The journey of music. The emergence of music. The emergences of music. The emergence of music. The source of music. The sources of music. The source of music. The originator of music. The originators of music. The originator of music. The origin of music. The origins of music. The origin of music. The forefather of music. The forefathers of music. The forefather of music. The foremother of music. The foremothers of music. The foremother of music. The ancestor of music. The ancestors of music. The ancestor of music. The descendant of music. The descendants of music. The descendant of music. The lineage of music. The lineages of music. The lineage of music. The heritage of music. The heritages of music. The heritage of music. The heir of music. The heirs of music. The heir of music. The co-heir of music. The co-heirs of music. The co-heir of music. The joint heir of music. The joint heirs of music. The joint heir of music. The dynasty of music. The dynasties of music. The dynasty of music. The force of music. The forces of music. The force of music. The law of music. The laws of music. The law of music. The pact of music. The pacts of music. The pact of music. The game of music. The games of music. The game of music. The mask of music. The masks of music. The mask of music. The armor of music. The armors of music. The armor of music. The sword of music. The swords of music. The sword of music. The shield of music. The shields of music. The shield of music. The force shield of music. The force shields of music. The force shield of music. The armored force shield of music. The armored force shields of music. The armored force shield of music. The champion of music. The champions of music. The champion of music. The guardian of music. The guardians of music. The guardian of music. The defender of music. The defenders of music. The defender of music. The protector of music. The protectors of music. The protector of music. The chant of music. The chants of music. The chant of music. The shape of music. The shapes of music. The shape of music. The cube of music. The cubes of music. The cube of music. The cuboid of music. The cuboids of music. The cuboid of music. The sphere of music. The spheres of music. The sphere of music. The spheroid of music. The spheroids of music. The spheroid of music. The prism of music. The prisms of music. The prism of music. The pyramid of music. The pyramids of music. The pyramid of music. The cylinder of music. The cylinders of music. The cylinder of music. The cone of music. The cones of music. The cone of music. The triangle of music. The triangles of music. The triangle of music. The circle of music. The circles of music. The circle of music. The semicircle of music. The semicircles of music. The semicircle of music. The square of music. The squares of music. The square of music. The rectangle of music. The rectangles of music. The rectangle of music. The parallelogram of music. The parallelograms of music. The parallelogram of music. The rhombus of music. The rhombuses of music. The rhombus of music. The trapezoid of music. The trapezoids of music. The trapezoid of music. The polygon of music. The polygons of music. The polygon of music. The pentagon of music. The pentagons of music. The pentagon of music. The hexagon of music. The hexagons of music. The hexagon of music. The septagon of music. The septagons of music. The septagon of music. The octagon of music. The octagons of music. The octagon of music. The nonagon of music. The nonagons of music. The nonagon of music. The decagon of music. The decagons of music. The decagon of music. The evolution of music. The evolutions of music. The evolution of music. The revolution of music. The revolutions of music. The revolution of music. The elemental art of music. The elemental arts of music. The elemental art of music. The elemental science of music. The elemental sciences of music. The elemental science of music. The elemental principle of music. The elemental principles of music. The elemental principle of music. The elemental technology of music. The elemental technologies of music. The elemental technology of music. The low elemental art of music. The low elemental arts of music. The low elemental art of music. The low elemental science of music. The low elemental sciences of music. The low elemental science of music. The low elemental principle of music. The low elemental principles of music. The low elemental principle of music. The low elemental technology of music. The low elemental technologies of music. The low elemental technology of music. The high elemental art of music. The high elemental arts of music. The high elemental art of music. The high elemental science of music. The high elemental sciences of music. The high elemental science of music. The high elemental principle of music. The high elemental principles of music. The high elemental principle of music. The high elemental technology of music. The high elemental technologies of music. The high elemental technology of music. The agent of music. The agents of music. The agent of music. The agency of music. The agencies of music. The agency of music. The amplifier of music. The amplifiers of music. The amplifier of music. The amplification of music. The amplifications of music. The amplification of music. The enhancer of music. The enhancers of music. The enhancer of music. The enhancement of music. The enhancements of music. The enhancement of music. The magnifier of music. The magnifiers of music. The magnifier of music. The magnification of music. The magnifications of music. The magnification of music. The influencer of music. The influencers of music. The influencer of music. The influence of music. The influences of music. The influence of music. The emanator of music. The emanators of music. The emanator of music. The emanation of music. The emanations of music. The emanation of music. The converger of music. The convergers of music. The converger of music. The convergence of music. The convergences of music. The convergence of music. The aura of music. The auras of music. The aura of music. The impression of music. The impressions of music. The impression of music. The intelligence of music. The intelligences of music. The intelligence of music. The sophistication of music. The sophistications of music. The sophistication of music. The genius of music. The geniuses of music. The genius of music. The polymath of music. The polymaths of music. The polymath of music. The psychic of music. The psychics of music. The psychic of music. The knowledge of music. The knowledges of music. The knowledge of music. The understanding of music. The understandings of music. The understanding of music. The wisdom of music. The wisdoms of music. The wisdom of music. The secret of music. The secrets of music. The secret of music. The mystery of music. The mysteries of music. The mystery of music. The revelation of music. The revelations of music. The revelation of music. The tactic of music. The tactics of music. The tactic of music. The strategy of music. The strategies of music. The strategy of music. The strength of music. The strengths of music. The strength of music. The might of music. The mights of music. The might of music. The power of music. The powers of music. The power of music. The authority of music. The authorities of music. The authority of music. The dominion of music. The dominions of music. The dominion of music. The rhythm of music. The rhythms of music. The rhythm of music. The melody of music. The melodies of music. The melody of music. The music of music. The musics of music. The music of music. The lyric of music. The lyrics of music. The lyric of music. The song of music. The songs of music. The song of music. The dance of music. The dances of music. The dance of music. The spirit of music. the spirits of music, the spirit of music, the soul of music, the souls of music, the soul of music, the body of music, the bodies of music, the body of music, the mark of music, the marks of music, the mark of music, the promise of music, the promises of music, the promise of music, the visionary of music, the visionaries of music, the visionary of music, the vision of music, the visions of music, the vision of music, the picture of music, the pictures of music, the picture of music, the sound of music, the sounds of music, the sound of music, the dung of music, the dungs of music, the dung of music, the language of music, the languages of music, the language of music, the communication of music, the communications of music, the communication of music, the people of music, the peoples of music, the people of music, the society of music, the societies of music, the society of music, the fortress of music, the fortresses of music, the fortress of music, the government of music, the governments of music, the government of music, the city of music, the cities of music, the city of music, the nation of music, the nations of music, the nation of music, the civilization of music, the civilizations of music, the civilization of music, the world of music, the worlds of music, the world of music,